Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're delighted to have you here. My name is John Hamre. I'm the president here at CSIS, and it's a real privilege to be able to welcome. This is one of the most remarkable duos I've ever met. I think that Deputy Prime Minister Poulsen has held every job in the cabinet that you can have, except for Prime Minister. And of course, we've got a foreign minister here who was prime minister twice. I mean, so do we have expertise sitting at this table, and it's remarkable. I was just back with them in the green room defending my Norwegian sovereignty. They want to take us over again, and I just, wait a minute, we're not going to let that happen. But we're going to have a good conversation today. It's really going to be interesting because we just had a very successful NATO summit. I mean, I think it was something everybody was worried about, and it turned out to have been remarkably good. And it, of course, comes at a time when there are these two very large galvanizing issues. We've got the war in Ukraine, this dreadful illegal war in Ukraine that grinds on. And then we have this tariff war that's going on, which is not subject of their jurisdiction, but it's a backdrop, into this conversation. And they're here with a sincere effort to try to say the transatlantic partnership is still vital and very important. And I think we're going to learn more about that in this conversation today. So let me just say a hearty thank you to you both. And Max, I'm going to turn it to you to get this started for real.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Hamre. I'm Max Bergmann. I'm the director of the Eurasia Program here at CSIS, and it's a real honor to be here with as Dr. Hamre said, two distinguished guests. To my right is Troels Lund Poulsen. As Dr. Hamre said, he's Denmark's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, and he is the current leader of the Venstre Party and has been a member of the Danish Parliament since 2001. I won't go through all the many jobs that you've had, but quite experienced resume, and not to be outdone by the man sitting to my left, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, the current Foreign Minister of Denmark, but as Dr. Hamre mentioned, also the former Prime Minister. So real honor to have both of you here for a conversation about Denmark's role in transatlantic security. Maybe I could start with sort of just a simple question, sort of what brings you to Washington? Mr. Lund Poulsen, if I could start with you. What brings you here? Is it the weather in July? What brings you to town?
It's not only the weather, I can say. The reason why I'm here together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs is in fact to interact with the American society and also politicians, lawmakers, and people around in the defense industry. I think it is indeed needed also to underline once again that U.S. is the most important ally for Denmark, and we would like to have that to continue. But we are also, of course, aware that we have some things we have to discuss, especially as Minister of Defense. We need more speed in our procurements from the U.S., from the military procurements. It takes too long to get the needed capabilities, and right now we are indeed in need for these capabilities. So that's my main objective to be here.
Minister Rasmussen, the U.S. Danish relationship has been one of the strongest relationships that we've had with any of our European allies, Denmark, serving side by side U.S. forces in Afghanistan. But there's been a lot of tension recently in the relationship and talks of transatlantic splits. In the meetings that you've been having over the last few days, what is the current state of U.S.-Danish relations?
As you rightly said, we have a very strong historical tie. I mean, I spoke at the 4th of July celebration in Denmark before I went to the airport. It is the biggest 4th of July celebration outside U.S. Have taken place since 1912, with a lot of important American guest speakers through time. And it was well attended also this year, even though, of course, the new president have created some kind of, introduced some kind of unpredictability. I have experienced it myself in my second term as Prime Minister, where I where he was, elected in his first term. But I think true friendship can overcome these kind of things. And generally speaking, I think we still have an excellent relationship. I mean, yesterday evening, we were supposed to have had a dinner with 42 members of Congress. Unfortunately, it was postponed because Speaker Johnson decided after the big beautiful bill to ask them to leave town for a week. But the fact that 42 congressmen were ready to meet us is a clear signal that we have a good relationship. Yesterday, I had a very constructive meeting with Secretary of State Rubio, and of course this Transatlantic issue have overshadowed, at least for a while, our relationship, or the good sides linked to our relationship. But basically, we have a strong relationship. U.S. is our biggest trading partner so far. During Trump's first term, U.S. became our biggest export market, particularly due to the green tech sector, which is quite funny, you could say, given some of the positions during Trump's first term. We have 1,000 Danish companies investing in U.S., creating like 200,000 jobs. So I would say we have a strong relation, and that's also why we have chosen Troels and I to spend 3 days here to interact not only with the formal political system, which is of course important, but I guess due to who is president right now, also the more informal, structures surrounding the Republican Party.
We're talking about security, but I want to just quickly follow up. The big news this week is about tariff decisions and trade, and how important it is that the transatlantic relationship also has a real economic component. Was trade a major part of your conversations? I know the EU is leading on those negotiations, but do you feel confident that there will be some sort of resolution to the potential for a spike in tariffs?
Well, it wasn't a major subject yesterday because it's not a part of Rubio's portfolio, but I will meet Lund later today. And I had a telephone conversation with our own European Commissioner, who is tasked to have these negotiations, and they are going on as we speak. I mean, Europe don't want a trade war at all. I was around when we discussed the TTIP, which unfortunately ended in nothing, but we need quite the opposite. We need to integrate the economy across the Atlantic to mutual benefit. This is not really what is on the table, but the second best will be to avoid any disturbing kind of barriers. We are still hopeful, but it's not easy. I think we can conclude now that the 9th of July deadline will be postponed to the 1st of August. And hopefully then we can conclude an agreement. That's another reason why we have decided to visit U.S. right now, because we took over the presidency of the European Union the 1st of July. Personally, I will be chairing the trade ministers meeting. We have called for an extraordinary one, the 14th of this month, as next Monday, after the deadline. Now it's postponed, but nevertheless to take stock. We don't want a trade war at all, but of course we need to respond. I mean, in a non-escalating way.
Mr. Poulsen, Dr. Hamre mentioned the NATO summit. The big announcements at the NATO summit were an increase in defense spending. Most countries agreeing to hit 5%, 3.5%, I guess, in core defense spending, and 1.5% in additional defense spending. There was a lot of criticism also of the summit, that it was the shortest statement, I think, in the history of NATO, and in a sense that maybe there was a commitment to defense spending, but that Europeans probably don't really have an intention of following that up and actually meeting that goal. How did you assess this NATO summit? What was your reaction coming out of The Hague?
I think that the Hague summit was a great success for NATO, but also for US and also Europe, in fact. If we go a year back, last year in July, we also attended the NATO meeting here in Washington. And at that time, quite many countries were not able to spend 2%. What has happened during July last year and until now, it has been amazing, I would say, because much more countries are now willing to step in, invest more, and even in Europe. And I think, also to be honest, the combination of the full-scale invasion from Putin into Ukraine and the new administration is also the reason why countries in Europe now has got that wake-up call. We have to do more, we have to spend more, we have to have more capabilities. In Europe, we are too dependable on US, and nevertheless, US will still be a major important player in NATO in the future, but Europe should also be able to do more. And I think that will be the outcome of the meeting in The Hague.
And so you came out of that NATO summit sort of assured about the U.S. commitment to NATO going forward.
Yes, I did. We have had a quite long discussion about what will the new administration, what will the idea be for them in NATO. Also, before Trump was elected, a huge discussion at defense meetings in NATO about the commitment from the U.S. And I think U.S. have said it quite clear, we will be in NATO, we will be a strong ally, but you have also in Europe to do more. You have to invest more, and you have to do it quite fast.
Let me also ask, there's a force posture review that is currently taking place at the Pentagon, looking at the U.S. global force presence. There's been a lot of talk or whispers around town that it could lead to significant troop cuts in Europe. Was that at all on the table or being discussed at the NATO summit, or is that something that will be sort of discussed later? Was that at all sort of on the radar of ministers as you all were discussing in meeting?
We didn't have a concrete discussion about that topic, but of course we have seen and heard also for quite many years also different administrations saying we have to be more active in China as South Sea area. So I think it was in fact Hillary Clinton that made the pivot to Asia. Mm-hmm. So quite many different administrations here in the US have had that perspective for the future. But nevertheless, Europe will do more, and I think the outcome of the situation in Ukraine is also the demanding question for Europe to be able to invest more and also build up more capacity. And I think we have not been able to fill the capability gaps in Europe, and we are now in a need to do that. We have to invest more also to get together to have some of these critical capabilities also able in Europe and not only in the US.
Minister Rasmussen, I'm curious if you share the same perspective on the NATO summit. I mean, one concern might be that some countries closer to Russia are investing in defense, really focused on the threat. Others further away, less focused. There's a lot of focus on Spain, for instance, their resistance to make another commitment to 3.5 or 5%. Are you worried at all that within Europe there could be a split, a division between countries really focused on the Russia threat and other countries that maybe legitimately don't perceive as much of a threat to their actual national security?
I'm not very worried. I mean, of course there are nuances, but I think it is important to be clear that there are no opt-outs. I mean, what we agreed in The Hague is covering everybody. And we have to meet these new criteria where the 3.5, I would say, is more important to meet fast compared to the 1.5. And what we really should make sure to avoid is that, people are, looking at the 1.5 and defining we are in what's the word? We are complying with that, right. And add things up and say we are now like 3%, 1.5 and 1.5 or whatever, because everything we agreed is important, but the 3.5 is the most important thing because that is needed to meet our capability targets. And I feel that there's a total different sense of urgency in Europe. We met shortly with President Trump during this meeting in the Netherlands, and I told him when we met last time, when I was Prime Minister, we only spent like 1.5% in Denmark. We actually tried to reopen our defense budget. It wasn't easy at all. I think we managed to increase the spending by 0.1. Then the whole thing happened in Ukraine. Now there's a totally new sense of urgency. This year, Denmark spends 3.2%, exactly the same as U.S. It is a clear commitment from our government that we will meet the 3.5, at least, at the latest in 2030. All NATO allies, apart from Iceland, who do not have a military, are now meeting the 2% targets. I mean, when it was agreed back in Wales, it was only 3 allies. And when we met with Trump at that famous summit in 2018, it was less than a handful, including countries as Greece, due to economic recession. Yeah. I mean, that's the nice thing about percentage. So everybody has stepped up. I guess the main challenge, as the defense minister also mentioned, is our capability to actually implement it. Because I think now we have the money, and we also have facilities within the European Union to assist those countries who do not have a sound fiscal situation as we have in Denmark. But the big issue is whether we have the needed defense industry capacity. And that will be a major priority for the Danish presidency. US have exactly the same kind of challenges as you just mentioned, which is the kind of main topic for your discussions with your counterparts during this visit. Now we responded to a US request stepping up, and now we are turning our heads to them and say, we want to buy. Can you deliver? I mean, that's a common problem we have to solve.
Minister, let me turn back to you, Mr. Poulsen, about the defense procurement. I saw actually today a big announcement, or I think I saw it today, I'm not sure if it happened today, about Denmark procuring lots of air defense systems, mainly from European companies. One of the critiques right now of how Europe spends is that Europeans don't coordinate their spending. We've actually done a study at CSIS that when there's more European defense spending, Europeans actually coordinate less. Ministries of defense then don't have to work together. When there's less money, they actually coordinate and cooperate more. It does strike me as a real issue of, how does Europe get that economies of scale? When you're looking at procurement, are you looking at it purely from this is what the Danish military needs, or how do you create economies of scale or work with other countries? What are the challenges there in trying to do sort of pan-European procurement? Is that an issue at all?
Yeah, it is an issue. First of all, also maybe to give that to the audience, we don't have a huge defense industry in Denmark. It's quite small. So the push for investing the money directly into Denmark is not as strong as going to Germany or France. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, during the last 2 years, we have had a very strong and also ambitious cooperation with our Nordic friends, having this idea of buying buying military equipment together. I think that would be the way forward. Just to give some examples, right now we are looking into buying ours from the P8 system, the Poseidon system, for a capacity they have in Norway and Germany, and not buying it ourselves, but buying ours. And we will also have some capabilities that we could use together with Sweden and Norway. So that will be the way forward. But the most important thing right now for me as Minister of Defense is in fact also have the lessons learned from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Ukraine are very strong to create new and innovative defense companies, and we could have much more money spent wisely to procure directly from Ukraine. That's not possible right now, but it will be possible in the future. So that will be the way forward. But of course, we should also discuss in Europe how we could be better connected to make investments together. That's a huge discussion right now because some countries would like to buy their own equipment. We could merge quite much together. Also NATO would have a more crucial part to play in that context. But the way forward for Denmark would be to have this Nordic umbrella, buying different capabilities together and also use them together.
I want to turn to Ukraine and Russia in a second, but let me follow up. Is there any concern about the reliability of buying American? There's been some talk in Europe, especially after the U.S. has held back certain weapons transfers to Ukraine, as well as Europeans looking at their own defense industrial base and saying, okay, if the U.S. did get into a shooting war in the Indo-Pacific, maybe it doesn't have enough supply for us in terms of precision-guided munitions or air defense interceptors. Is there a focus now in Europe or in Denmark about trying to build up the European defense industrial base and investing more in European companies?
I must say, to be honest, there's been a quite huge discussion about that right now, also with the tensions that we have got about the Greenlandic issue. Okay. But I'll say still there's a broad agreement in the Danish parliament that, of course, we also in the future should be able to buy even more military equipment from the US. Are you going to the southern part of Europe? I don't think that's the same outcome for the discussion. I think France would like to have that we only should buy military equipment in Europe. But we have to build up more capacity in Europe, but still also have a strong cooperation and also being able to buy even more military equipment here in the US. The F-35s is a quite good example. Mm-hmm. We have introduced that new fighter jet in Denmark. I think we have to buy even more in the future. So that will be the way forward, and not buying Gripen or another European fighter jet. So we have to stick to what's also the need for the military and also for the military capabilities. And that's also the reason why it is important that US will speed up the production of their military capabilities so we can have them in a shorter period of time. I think when we ordered F-35s, if I'll do that today, I'm not in it to order something today, but I think we will get them delivered 5 or 6 years from now. That's not fast enough. So we have to deal with that. And I know the administration, Trump, is quite much aware of that, and also Pete Hegseth and Mark Rubio. They are aware that they have to speed up all these processes. Too much red tape in delivering to Europe. And when we are coming to US saying we would like to buy even more military equipment, then I don't think the answer should be you have to wait 7 years to get it.
Right, indeed. The challenges of US military procurement are sort of maybe beyond.
And we know also these challenges in Denmark and other countries.
You mentioned Ukraine, Danish support for Ukraine. Mr. Rasmussen, there's been discussion or talk of a Danish model in terms of support for Ukraine. Denmark has really been a leader, I think, since the war started, giving all your howitzers, CSIS howitzers to Ukraine. Maybe you could articulate or describe for us what is the Danish model and what is the Danish sort of approach to your support for Ukraine militarily?
Well, the Danish model is under development, I would say. Troels and I paid a common visit to Ukraine, is it 1.5 years ago, that particular one?
In April last year.
April last year, yeah. And first of all, to set it into some kind of context, we are quite a big sponsor. Mm-hmm. In total numbers, we are the 4th biggest contributor to Ukraine. So it's like US, UK, Germany, and then Denmark. Per capita, we are so far the biggest. We spent like plus 1,500 euro per capita in Denmark. It's more than the double compared to the 2nd biggest spender in Europe. So what's actually happened, to be very concrete about it, was when we met with some of these Ukrainian defense companies, where we decided to not invest, but to procure directly. They basically looked at Troels and I and said, you guys are doing so much. I mean, you should also invest. And now we're not talking about just procure or buying. It's about real investments. So we have worked on that and we have developed this idea. So now it's not, I wouldn't say one model, it's like perhaps 3 models. Basically, it's about buying from Ukraine to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. I think you mentioned the figures yesterday. Troels, originally when the war happened or started, they had a capacity similar to like $3 billion. It's now up to 40, but they only have finance for half of it. So there's a huge potential. It's easier, it's cheaper, it's close to the fighting lines, etc. So there's a lot of potential linked to this. And we have spent our own money, and we also have the honor to be the facilitator of some of these frozen assets, or the interest linked to the frozen asset. So that is the basis of the Danish model. And now we are working on making, real investments, not only procurement. We are also, working closely with our Ukrainian friends to set up Ukrainian investments in Denmark to give them some kind of safe haven. So I think we have a very integrated cooperation with Ukraine. Since we, started this journey a year ago, other countries have followed suit, at least to some extent. It's not only the frozen asset, but it's also, decision taking in our neighboring countries, pooling money together. And this is something we should do more. I mean, they are in desperate need for more military equipment, and they can actually produce a lot of it themselves. And then I think I should leave it to Troels to follow up on this, because it has so many implications. I mean, we are also now rearming our own military, and we should avoid, to do it mirrored in the last war, when there's an ongoing war with new development, drones and stuff. Also to avoid overspending, we should be inspired of what the Ukrainians lesson learned from their battlefield. And that's why it makes sense also to invest, not only to assist them, but also to make some kind of technology transferring from Ukraine to our own military. But I think I should leave it to Troels.
Maybe just to give a short follow-up. The first pilot project that we engaged in was last year in July, and we reimbursed 18 Bogdana artillery systems. They were produced in 2 months. Should we have been able to buy them in Europe, it would have taken 2 years. So in 2 months, they were able to produce the Bogdana systems. It was very, very cheap. And the spare parts, the maintenance, all that kind of thing are, of course, being doing directly near the front line. So it has been a huge success. And right now we are looking into also develop new capabilities or finance new capabilities for the defense companies in Ukraine. That will be missiles, that will be drones. It's on the Ukrainian defense demands that they ask for this, and we reimburse the contracts. So that's in fact very simple. It's so simple that why are not more countries doing that? We are arguing more money should be spent directly. As Lars just mentioned, $20 billion is now free for capacity in Ukraine. So the best way we can do for our friends in Ukraine to keep up fighting is in fact to give money directly into the defense companies.
Are there challenges, though, for Ukraine in expanding production, knowing that those are going to be targets for Russian missile strikes and Russian attacks? So you mentioned, the minister mentioned bringing Ukrainian production into Denmark. Is that also part of the strategy to sort of use Ukraine to make Ukraine sort of part of the European defense industrial base?
Yeah, that's what we will say the Danish model 2.0. That's to invite some of the defense companies to have a safe haven in Denmark, to produce what they will need in Ukraine, hopefully also in Germany and other European countries. And then, as Lars also rightly mentioned, hopefully we could also rearm the Danish defense by some of these companies, because they have combat-proven technologies. The chief of defense from Denmark is also together with us on this trip here in the U.S., and he has, in fact, been a leading person in lessons learned coming out from Ukraine, how we can also invest on a wisely spent way of spending the money wisely in the build-up of the defense capabilities in Denmark. So hopefully, lessons learned from Ukraine will also have the outcome that we will be able to spend the money more wisely than just buying military equipment.
the United States has seemingly, or at least indicated that it's going to at least be ramping down its support for Ukraine. The president or the Pentagon had announced that it was halting or suspending deliveries of the president recently. Last night, I believe, has turned back on some of those shipments, at least for air defense. But it seems pretty clear that the United States has no intention, this administration has no intention of going back to Congress, asking for another supplemental to provide aid to Ukraine, and that it will be increasingly on Europe to support Ukraine. How big of a challenge is this going to be for Europe, having to pick up the lion's share of support? Is this a major focus of your conversations with other defense ministers? And maybe you could also talk a little bit about how you see the battlefield situation playing out right now in Ukraine, and whether there's a real urgency to this.
Yeah. First of all, I think it is tough times in the eastern part of Ukraine. The Ukrainian soldiers are under heavily pressure from Russia, and they are also in need for more ammunition, more artillery systems, more air defense. So we have to do more to help them also in the coming months. U.S. has decided what U.S. has decided. I think that's difficult for me to convince U.S. to do what they have been doing before. But nevertheless, the most important part right now is that Europe would be able to buy military equipment here in the U.S. so we can donate these military systems directly to Ukraine. That is also a discussion going on right now. I think Trump is on the right path here. I think he has promised that would be a possibility. We are talking in these hours about 10 Patriot systems, and I think the outcome of that discussion will be that European countries will be able to buy the Patriot systems and then donate them directly to Ukraine. And that's important, because the discussions 2 months ago was in fact that there were no more to buy here in the US. So the outcome of the discussion right now is moving in a better direction, that we can have some of the needed capabilities here in the US, because we don't have all the capabilities produced in Europe.
So there is progress, you think, happening?
I see some progress, yeah.
Minister, maybe we could turn back to you on where you think this war is going. The Trump administration has attempted to have negotiations to end the fighting. Those do not appear to be successful, and it seems like the war is continuing on at pace. What do you think sort of Russia's objectives are, and what are your concerns in Denmark, and how do you see this sort of playing out over the next year or so, and what are you hearing in your discussions with other European ministers as well?
I mean, it all depends on how we respond. I mean, you shouldn't overestimate the power of Russia. I mean, we have weakened the economy. They are now on a war footing, so to speak. They spend more on military than in health and education and everything civilized combined. They have huge casualties, high inflation. I mean, if it was a more open, transparent society with some kind of internal discussions, things would have been very, very different. If you compare the casualties with what they lost in Afghanistan and decided to withdraw, it's much worse. But of course, it's a closed society, and it is one man take all decision kind of society. It's not a democracy, but it is within our hands, so to speak, to actually crash Putin and his war machine. The big question is whether we have the readiness, the willingness to do so. And here, of course, we need US. I mean, it goes without saying that Europe have to pay a bigger part of the bill. We do so. We now count for like 70% of the total support to Ukraine. That number will go up. But we need US on board as well, not least when we are talking sanctions and pressure on Putin. And here I must say I leave Washington a bit more optimistic compared to when I arrived. Mm-hmm. I think the statement made by the president after his telephone conversation with Putin and Zelensky proves that he now, to a large extent, share our analysis of the situation. I mean, it was a bit confusing earlier this year when he had Zelensky in the Oval Office. Who is the bad guy? Who is the good guy? That has shifted. I think the NATO summit was also important. I mean, I really feel and think he has perhaps the most positive view on Europe he has had for a while, at least. And now we need to build on that momentum. I'm meeting with Lindsey Graham later today. I hope and I think that when this big beautiful bill is now passed, the Senate will now, start working on that sanction package. We are in Europe right now in internal discussions about an 18th sanction package stepping up. Also sanctions on China's entities, because you shouldn't underestimate the importance of the role China is playing. And if we combine, forces on that pathway, I mean, then we could change the situation. Putin will not give up. I mean, he still have this maximalistic approach. And I think he wants these 5 regions at the least. And if not military, I mean, then he wanted in a diplomatic track. We shouldn't, of course, not allow that. If there's not a ceasefire, then the war will go on, and will go on for months, years. There's no way Ukraine will surrender. I mean, it's a very resilient society. I really admire it, especially taking into account that while they have been fighting, they have also been working hard to reform their society. That's another important aspect from a Danish point of view, that we should keep moving on that political track, engaging Ukraine in the European family. There are difficulties linked to this as well. Europe consists of 27 different countries. There are definitely nuances, and our president, Ursula von der Leyen, don't have the same kind of access to easy decision making as your president. Just showing a sign in television, and we have taken a strong decision. So we need to have everybody on board. It's a top priority for Denmark that we bring some kind of progress to this enlargement process with Ukraine during this Danish presidency. And everything is interlinked, because this is also about morale in the Ukrainian society. I mean, if we should push them, and if they should push themselves within the European Parliament to continuously deliver on good governance, anti-corruption, transparency, etc., Europe also must respond, and this idea of being an EU member state shouldn't be something which, is so far in the horizon that no one believes it will ever happen. So, but I think we are more on the same page with the U.S. administration today compared with a few months ago.
I want to turn to the Danish presidency of the European Union in a second, but I want to maybe talk about the Arctic. The Arctic has become a major focus for the United States, also a focus for NATO, has been included in the strategic concept. And there's been a lot of tension between Denmark and the United States over Greenland. I'm curious how you all see the current state of Arctic security, and what's been the tenor of your conversations with the administration when it comes to the Arctic, when it comes to Greenland on your visit here? Mr. I'll start.
We really haven't had any in-depth discussion about Greenland, because, I mean, we have the slogan, nothing about Greenland without Greenland. And even though the foreign and security policy is, the Danish government's responsibility, we have developed a good tradition or custom that if we are, really negotiating with the third countries about these issues, we will have our Greenlandic colleague. But of course we, in a more general way, touched upon this because we realized that, and Troels can elaborate on that there's a different security situation in Arctic. I mean, everybody, and it was a kind of decision taken by consensus or silence perhaps, that we should keep the Arctic as a low tension area. after the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's why we established this Arctic Council, etc. And even though we have this defense agreement with U.S. since which is dated back to 1951, U.S. herself decided, to demilitarize everything. At some stage during the Cold War, U.S. had 17 different military installations in Greenland. Now they only have one. It's not a decision taken in Copenhagen; it's a decision taken in Washington. So it was, the common approach, and finally and slowly, everybody realized that there's a new situation due to de-icing and Russia and China's influence in Russia, and we need to respond on that. Denmark, alongside Norway, Canada, have been aware of this for a couple of years. No much attention in the White House, previous to this administration. And then, of course, we are taken by surprise that, we need that for national security, international security. The only way to protect it is to kind of make an annexation. But I think that is what I have experienced with Trump so many times, that whatever he says, and whatever he proposes, there's always some kind of rational substance behind it. I mean, and we share the view that we have to be present in the Arctic in a different way, but it shouldn't be in a fight between the Kingdom of Denmark and US. It should be by combining forces, and we have the framework for that. And that's also why we have been pushing, and Troels have been pushing, for including Arctic in the capability targets in NATO. And to some extent we were successful. There's now a kind of principal agreement among the NATO Arctic countries, including US, that this is something we should do under the framework of the NATO. So it's not that the Greenlandic issue is solved, I think, because apart from these rational substance-linked arguments, I can't get rid of the idea that there's also just this vision of creating a bigger US, and we can't, of course, not accommodate that. Mm-hmm. But everything linked to security, mining, business, whatever, we can accommodate.
And there have been real announcements from Denmark in strengthening security in Greenland. Maybe you could talk about those.
Yeah, I can, and it's quite interesting because all these announcements was in fact decided before Trump went out with his views on Greenland. We decided that in October, November last year in the Danish government that we had to spend more and also invest more heavily in some of the new capabilities. That will be drones. So we will have a better situational awareness about what's going on in that huge area. It will also be new vessels. And right now we are also discussing to invest in new frigates, just to mention some of the new capabilities. But all these things was in fact decided by the Danish government before this discussion got public. I think that's very important to underline. And last year, I had a meeting with Austin, the Minister of Defense at that time, in Pentagon. And Pentagon has just announced at that time a new strategy for the Arctic. And I had the pleasure of discussing that with Austin at that time. And there was not a push saying that you are not doing enough in Denmark. We discussed how we could do even more together. And I think that's also the outcome of the current discussion, because we have to be able to spend more to have a better situation awareness about what's going on. There's not a direct military threat in the Arctic area, but we see some countries being more active, Russia and also China in the longer run. So I understand the need for being better prepared for the future, and we will also be able to do that. And I think the outcome is right now quite successfully from the discussions in NATO. NATO have to pay more attention to the Arctic. Mm-hmm. Has not been paid any attention to the Arctic area for many years. Now we are willing to pay more attention to that important area, also inside NATO.
Let me turn to Denmark has just taken the helm of the presidency of the European Union, which rotates every 6 months on July 1st. And it's interesting that some of the priorities from Denmark for this 6-month term are on defense and security. And so maybe you could outline what are your goals for the next 6 months as Denmark takes the helm?
I would say the most important goal when we are talking about defense, that would be the link between defense companies in Ukraine and Europe, so we can speed up production in Europe, because the scale of production is too low in Europe. We have to do more in that context. We have also made some different instruments for financing new production capabilities and production capacities for companies. So to speed up this process, I think that's indeed needed in Europe. And too much red tape, I must say. It's too difficult for companies to establish production. We have seen in Denmark, we decided 2 years ago to establish a new ammunition factory in Denmark. Now, 2 years after, we are only beginning to build that area. It is taking too long to get there. And that's not only a Danish situation. Going around in Europe, you still see it'll maybe take 4 or 5 or 6 years to start up or larger your production capacity. That's not the right outcome. Time is not a luxury in Europe. We have to speed that up. Also, to create better conditions for production in Europe for European defense companies. And of course, hopefully we can also invite more American companies to start up production in Europe. For some hours ago, I visited a company, a very interesting company here in the U.S., that hopefully also will be able to go to Europe to start up production of some missiles that could be of our interest.
One of the big changes that happened after Russia invaded Ukraine was not simply Sweden and Finland joining NATO. Also, Denmark had a referendum about whether it was going to stay with its opt-out clauses from EU defense initiatives. I think the vote was 66%. Denmark is now participating in EU defense initiatives. There's been a lot of proposals put out by the European Commission earlier this year, a $150 billion or euro loan program. Do you see those continuing and making real progress in advancing those over the Danish presidency?
Yes, I do. And I guess more and more people realize that, we need more Europe and not less Europe in order to survive in all aspects of life. Because what Troels just said about red tape linked to the defense industry is correctly the same thing if you talk about any other kind of important infrastructure decisions. I mean, I think in average it will take like 10 years from someone come up with the idea to establish an offshore wind farm in Europe so you can actually, tap into it. In China it's like 4 or 4.5 years. We are totally over-regulated. And therefore, the buzzword of these days is simplification. And I think the security situation is enough hot burning platform which will lead to Europe actually responding. And that should be used in other areas and aspects of life as well, because we have, generally speaking, a problem about competitiveness. And therefore, it's an additional reason why we should avoid this trade war, because U.S. is in kind of the same boat. People keep saying that in U.S. they're innovating, in China they're copying or replicating, and in Europe we are regulating. The last thing is absolutely true. But it's not true that China is just, duplicating in so many areas. They are at our speed or perhaps ahead. So I think the biggest priority for us this fall is security in all aspects. I mean, and that, of course, the most important is hardcore security, rearming Europe, but it's also being more competitive. And it's also diversifying, trade channels. We love US, we want a decent relationship, and we want to avoid any kind of barriers, and we want to enhance the cooperation. but we also need to be realistic. And I think what we are looking into is a U.S. which over the next decades will have a kind of different perspective for very good reasons. If you look into demographic, if you look into the economic development around the globe, it's not the most natural thing that it's only about Europe. And that's probably also some of the reasons behind this pause towards Europe, Ukraine, which is hopefully abolished now, that you have interest, most recently Iran, Israel, what's in the stock, what is your priority, and Europe must be more independent in all aspects, but it must be worked out in a balanced way where we do not cut ties. So among our priorities is also to start and finalize trade deals with countries around the world. And we have talked a lot about that. I think now we are reopening discussions with Saudi Arabia. I think the first mandate was given back in '85, and then it was renewed in 2001. And we still don't have a trade agreement with Saudi Arabia. So Mercosur, we have been working that for a generation, and that is among some of our priorities. And it's not, turning our backs towards US. It's just to be sure and take advantage of the new geopolitical situation, so that Europe could have a more diversified supply chains and a more resilient economy.
Excellent. I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Please here and there. Yeah, microphone is coming. If you keep it to a question, greatly appreciate if you introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Jay Kansara from Sensei Minerals. How is Denmark expected to contribute to the EU plan for stockpiling of critical minerals in advance of potential military engagement going forward? And is Danish manufacturing capability there to extract from various places around the world?
And then we'll go to this gentleman right here in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Jeff Price, Johns Hopkins SICE, and one-time colleague of Dr. Hamre in the Defense Department. My question, and thank you, by the way, for Denmark's leadership on Ukraine. My question has to do with the Nordic-Baltic area and the implications both of Russia's new aggressive posture, but also Finland and Sweden joining the alliance, sort of closing the circle, allowing for reinforcement from another side. One, your thoughts about the implications of the current security environment on Denmark's planning and European planning for defense, and also whether Denmark might play a role in enhanced capabilities, critical enablers like logistics and resupply reinforcement in the Nordic-Baltic region.
Great. So we have two questions, a few minutes left, on critical minerals and Nordic-Baltic cooperation defense planning. So
please take the lead.
Okay, I'll give some short remarks about the Nordic concept for working together. And I think we could be, as I said, being able to do even more. Some of the new capabilities that we will have to introduce, we will be doing that together with our friends in Sweden and Norway, and also Finland, in fact. Just to give one example, we have just introduced the buying of the CV90 vehicles, combat vehicles. That's a Swedish company, but we have seen that more countries will be able to buy these. So that's a very good idea. We can have common training activities, spare parts, all that kind of thing. Also, in the maritime area or atmosphere, we will see more spending together on some of the new capabilities. Right now, we will have a meeting coming up in November hopefully we will be able to set an agenda on how we can spend wisely on some new maritime capabilities around the Nordic or the Baltic Sea, but especially with the focus on the Nordic countries. If you see the economy, having all the Nordic countries together, we have a very strong economy, I think number 12 in the world or something like that. Huge amount of money to invest together. So that's also the reason why Finland and Sweden, when they now have entered NATO, we have huge potential to do even more. And that has changed during the last 2 years. If you have talked about Nordic cooperation 3 years ago in the Danish parliament, people were laughing. Now people are saying that's the right way forward because now it's a NATO area.
And critical minerals.
Yeah, but just to follow up on that, I guess the Nordic cooperation is really revitalized due to what has happened, and I think it is not exactly what Putin expected when he made the invention into Ukraine, that we now have much stronger Europe, we have much stronger NATO, much stronger Nordic cooperation, and it's a true advantage that Finland and Sweden now joined, and also goes for cooperation around the Baltic Seas. And it's not only about military capacity; it's also about what we are working closely together on right now is how to combat the shadow fleet, for instance. It comes with a lot of difficult judicial questions because we all appreciate the innocent passage. I mean, we are a shipping nation, and how do we balance that and things like that. So, I mean, it has really revitalized that kind of cooperation. I mean, in terms of critical minerals, if you look at the core territory of Denmark, the small country Denmark, we don't have a lot of critical minerals in Denmark. If you look at the kingdom, I mean, there are huge potential in Greenland, and the Greenlandic government is more than willing to explore that. Last year, for the first time ever, we had a visit from the President of the European Union to Greenland. There's now a European office in Nuuk, and we should explore that. In terms of skills, we have Danish companies as F.L. Schmidt and others who have experience, which can be used, but otherwise, I mean, during this presidency, it's up to Denmark to facilitate the discussions and establish frameworks to deliver on that agenda. It's not something Denmark, as a small farming country, we have not particularly, as a country, something to offer. But what we can offer is to facilitate a better framework of cooperation within the European Union. And I think that is our main contribution this fall, that we are a small, I would say, pretty well-recognized country, pretty efficient, also in terms of our administrative system, etc. So I think that's why some of our colleagues have pretty high expectations to what we can deliver the next couple of months.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. Ministers, I want to thank you so much. And for the audience here, I really want to also give a shout out to the CSIS team that has helped put this events together, our great interns, Otto Svensson and Alexei Linefelter. And I also want to thank Denmark for its leadership on Ukraine, for its partnership with the United States. And hopefully that continues going forward. And if the audience please join me in thanking the ministers.